I don't believe that I worked with anyone who was an actor and director up until that point. But the first day of shooting that I worked, and he was in his outfit as Quinlan, I was just like, because I didn't know what he was going to do, because he wasn't that heavy at that point. You know, everyone thinks because later on he got heavy. When they saw A Touch of Evil, they thought that was him, and it wasn't at all. That's why I was so shocked, because all of a sudden he's got this big paunch, and he put on these jowls and bags under his eyes, and he was a master at makeup.
There's a very funny story about that. When he came back to Hollywood, he was back in Hollywood for the first time in 10 years. And he was making, for the first time in 10 years, he was shooting a picture in Hollywood also. And he threw a party for all his old friends, the Goldwyns, the Warners, everybody, and at his house. But he was shooting late, so he didn't have time to take off the makeup. So he arrived still in his Hank Quinlan makeup and padding, and he was heavily padded for the part. Anyway, he walked in, and everybody said, "Hey, Orson, oh, you look great." You know, boy, you haven't changed at all. You look just great.
Hey, Susie.
A good example of the difference in the technology now and then was that then they were still doing shots of moving cars on blue screen on a soundstage. You can always tell those shots because the actors are steering very busily, but they're standing talking like this all the time. But Orson wanted to do what became the first dialogue scene in a moving car in the history of film.
We have still to get some proof.
And we were shooting again down in Venice, though this was a day shot, in an alley, a long alley. Orson said, "Now we'll take out the windshield, put the camera on a platform on the front." And they did all that. But the convertible was so full of equipment that you couldn't get the sound man in, you couldn't get the camera operator in. And the first AD said, "Well, we can take out the whole front of the car and just pull it behind the truck." And Orson said, "No, no, no." He said, "These lads can handle this." He said, "It's easy, just show them how to turn on the sound, and when it gets to speed, and the camera, all that." And so they showed us how to turn on the sound, and so Mort was the sound man, and I was the operator and the director. And I'd say, "Action!" And we'd be driving along and doing the scene, talking to each other the way you do when you have to really drive. So we did 3 or 4 takes, and finally I said, "Cut, print. Thank you very much." And my first experience at directing.
Well, Hank has done it again. He's nailed his man.
Thanks to you, partner.
Me?
Yeah.
We had a wonderful cast. Joe Kalea, who was wonderful as Quinlan's assistant, and Ray Collins, and very significantly Akim Tamirov, who I guess could play almost any kind of a part. Of course, Orson was able to call on a whole galaxy of star actors to do bits for him.
Zita? I didn't know her. She only joined this show a few days ago.
We really, literally, never knew who was going to be on the set.
An hour ago, Rudy Lineker had this town in his pocket.
Now you can strain through a sieve.
Joseph Cotten is the doctor, and we didn't know that.
I told you we were close.
I'm Hank Quinlan.
I didn't recognize you. You should lay out those candy bars.
DIETRICH was a very good part. I had been looking forward to the possibility of doing a scene with DIETRICH, but I had no scene with Marlene and DIETRICH, to my eternal disappointment.
Of course, Marlene was an old friend. You know, they go way back to entertaining the troops in World War II. She was in his magic act. He sawed her in half, you know. Now, she told me that Orson called her to do this picture and didn't even tell Universal about it, and said, "Listen, you have to play a gypsy woman." And she said, "I know where I can get my wig from Golden Earrings from Paramount. I know how I can get the wig." Marlene said to me, she said, "You know, I always liked Orson. I always had a little bit of a crush on him, but he never gave me another look because, you know, Orson, you know, doesn't like blondes. He prefers brunettes. And when I arrived on the set to do Touch of Evil, and I had on my brunette wig from Paramount, it was the first time Orson looked at me like, well, maybe."
I knew Marlene. We didn't have any scenes together, but the night that she worked, Even though I didn't have a scene with her, I worked also. So the night that she worked, there was champagne in everybody's dressing room. Not that you could drink it, because you couldn't work. I mean, I couldn't anyway, but Orson always did everything in a grand way.
Hey, Donna!
I'll be right there.
There's a funny story about when the studio, they were watching the dailies and suddenly they said, "Is that Marlene Dietrich?" And they said, "Yeah, that's Marlene Dietrich. Do we have a deal with her?" "No, I don't know. Where'd she come from? I don't know."
With his take on this character.
A couple of days later, Orson said, "I really like the character, the way it's developed, and I'd like to improvise some scenes with you." And I said, "Well, you know, I only created the character like a day or two before, and I'm not sure that I know the character well enough to improvise at this point. If I could see the dailies or if I'd seen the rushes, well, maybe I could do it." And at that moment, without hesitation, he turned to the assistant director and says, "We're going to close down the set for an hour or so, and Dennis and I are going over to the projection room, and we're going to look at his dailies." I had never had that happen to me, nor since.
I recall we did the interior on the set at Universal, and all of a sudden this character walks in.
Hi. What are you doing here?
I didn't know it was Dennis Weaver. I said, where did he get this character? My God. We were all just dumbstruck. Where did this, I don't even think even before we were doing the scene, I don't even think we had a rehearsal. He just walked in. And then all of a sudden I saw my friend Wayne Taylor reacting, you know, the junkie, and we started laughing because the whole thing just started flowing. We were all just amazed by this spontaneity.
You know what marijuana is, don't you?
Yes. The motel, that sequence was rather risque at that time, but there's so many subplots going on that I don't know where the censors knew where to look first, because what was suggested in that scene was drugs, lesbianism.
The fun is only beginning.
Gang rape.
Hold her legs.
But we didn't exceed the censors' extremes. It was just the suggestion.
Close the door.
We put on a good show to scare her.
Let's hope it was good enough.
That series of scenes in the hotel room where first Hakim gets rid of the girls and then he motions for Orson to come in and then they have their scene, he kills them. I had never seen, on a feature, I had never seen a handheld camera used to shoot. I mean, you could manipulate it and you got the fluidity because the camera moved with the action. Not just dolly, but I mean up, down, sideways, everything.
Understand, this is 1957, and Welles had been in France and had seen the Eclair Camaflex, which was one of the first 35mm cameras really designed to be handheld. And here was a studio camera department that was not used to anything like this. I mean, the equipment had not changed an awful lot in 20 years at the time that Welles brought this camera. Phil Lathrop, who went on to become a very successful cinematographer, was Russ Meddy's operator at the time. So it was the idea that this studio camera team got what Welles was talking about. Here was Welles giving a lesson to the filmmakers of the world about what these tools could mean.
Made it very distorted, exciting, like it was really happening. And then to wake up and see this was horrific, just horrific. The shot with Akim Tamarov when he's dead over the bed, he had kind of like an attachment to his eye that kind of went out like that. To top it all off, when I went out to the balcony, which was exterior, that was a real hotel in Venice, and in the room behind me on that balcony, there was a derelict who was drunk out on the bed. And I had to go through that room to get to the balcony with, believe me, with 2 or 3 assistant directors.
Now, look, why don't you just take your wife home and let me handle this thing? It's my job. It's my job too, Menzies.
All night shooting is difficult. Shooting in the water is double difficult.
Come on, Hank.
How many did you frame?
I told you. Nobody. Nobody that wasn't guilty.
We shot that scene, which is quite a long scene, over at least 2 nights. It was the end of shooting on the picture. And I was wading across the canal and holding this wire recorder. Then the death of Quinlan. It's a wonderful scene.
Marlene told me she thought the best moment in any movie she ever did was the last moment in Touch of Evil, when she says, "What does it matter what you say about people?"
Hank was a great detective, all right.
And a lousy cop.
Is that all you have to say for him?
He was some kind of a man. What does it matter what you say about people?
We finished about 6 in the morning, and we wrapped the company, and Orson and I went to get some breakfast at a coffee shop. And he brought along a bottle of a very good champagne. We shared, and we were having a happy time telling each other how wonderful we were. And I said, you know, Orson, this is a wonderful film, I think. I'm very proud of doing it and of working with you, and it's been a very exciting time. I think we have a wonderful picture. And I said, you only made one mistake. He said, what is that, my boy? He always called me my boy. And I said, there are 3 or 4 short scenes in the picture that are only there to kind of indicate that I have the leading role in the film. I said, that's not true. This film is about the fall of Captain Quinlan. But I knew that, Orson. He said, well, then we don't have to worry about it in the cutting, do we?
When I finished, I really felt, all of us did, that you never know what the audience is going to say, but just for our own point of view, I think we felt very excited in that we knew we had done things that had not been done before, that we had attempted things that had not been attempted before. The expectation was to see it cut, obviously.
When they got done with production, they went into post-production, and Orson was there through the early stages of it. And about halfway through, he went off looking for his next gig, whatever that was going to be. During the time that he was gone, the studio took a look at the cut. They really didn't like what they saw.
I got a call from one of the studio executives saying, could you get in touch with Orson? I said, how can I get in touch with Orson? I said, the last I saw of him was before I went off. I said, I'm making a picture for Wyler now, William Wyler, The Big Country. I don't know where Orson is. And they said, well, he disappeared, you know, and we don't know where he is, and we'd like to talk to him. Of course, what he had done, when he finished his first cut, Orson had left the country, gone down to Mexico, I think, to try and raise money to make Don Quixote. And that's a big no-no. He should never have done that.
My first hint that something was wrong was when we were asked to come back and do some added scenes.
I said, is Orson going to do it? They said, no, 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 he's not going to direct. And I said, well, then I'm not doing it. And of course, my agent and my attorney said, Chuck, as a member of the Screen Actors Guild, you have to do them. And I realized, of course, that was true. So thus, in effect, he was blackballed. And you can say, well, that's a terrible loss. It's awful. That's true. It is awful. But Orson was responsible for it.
Harry Keller had been hired to write the connecting scenes, they said, the clarifying scenes, they said, and direct these added scenes.
Well, this kid, who was he?
I don't know. And I don't want to know. All I want to do is to get out of here.
They were shots including me and Janet Leigh. I can't say that making those shots hurt the film or particularly helped the film, but it was a very sad event.
They rewrote sections, reshot, re-edited, and ended up with what we referred to as the preview version. When they finally showed the preview version to Orson, he looked at it, was not happy with what he saw, and that's when he turned around and fired back the 58-page memo.
The memo that Orson Welles wrote the night of December 4th, 1957, was a pleading memo to not dramatically alter the picture, but to change it within significant punctuation points to make it play as a better and more commercial movie.
He felt that the story was more confusing in the Universal's cut than in his. And it is true that they did obscure the story needlessly and spelled out certain things and confused you in other areas. It was a pretty sloppy job.
It's a mess. It's a stinking mess.
Basically, he was trying to argue not only so much even for his own conception of the original ideas about it, but more sort of like, this is what we've got now and this is how we can make it better, even from your point of view. And there were lots of different points he made in it, only some of which were followed by the studio.